We at the Everything Red Deer podcast acknowledge that it is recorded on Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 land, as well as on a historic gathering place of the Métis. We thank the elders and knowledge keepers who remain with us today and those who've gone before us. This acknowledgement is small, but meant nonetheless as an act of reconciliation and gratitude.
Local, credible, now. You're listening to the Everything Red Deer podcast, powered by RD News Now. We talk to the movers, shakers, and newsmakers around Red Deer and Central Alberta, then bring those interviews to you. And now, here's your host, Josh Hall.
Welcome to the Everything Red Deer podcast. Yes, sir, I'm Josh Hall, and it is March 28th, 2025. Thanks so much for joining me once again. Today, we're tackling an update about a big incident that happened nearly 4 weeks ago here in Red Deer. It was March 1st when a small group of people showed up at a few different locations downtown with signs reading "Deport them all" and "White Lives Matter." These were actually on the doorsteps of local settlement agencies. There was also a flag with a logo linked to white supremacist ideologies. We covered this shortly after it happened, and this was actually the subject of a podcast episode earlier this month, but today we're taking it in a bit of a different direction. First off, I can tell you officially that Alberta RCMP have concluded their investigation into this incident. No charges will be laid, as there are not sufficient grounds, they say, to do so. There is a fine line, as some familiar with the Criminal Code of Canada will know, between one's freedom of speech on one side, and on the other, hate crimes, hate incidents, and the thresholds that need to be met for charges to be laid. So with all of that knowledge, today we're talking to a few different people, including Corporal Mohammed Khalid, who is the hate crime coordinator for the Alberta RCMP's Diverse Community Engagement Unit, and the co-chair of the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, Gender, and Harassment Action Committee. I'm also going to chat with the organizers of a great long-standing event here in Red Deer. They are Jilta Datus Hall with Red Deer Local Immigration Partnership and Shannon Humphrey with the Red Deer Native Friendship Center. They were both instrumental in putting on the recent 10th annual Community Power of One conference. And they have some really interesting insight on how Red Deer can be more united, for one, and also move on the right way from what was a pretty discouraging incident that happened, as I say, about a month ago here in Red Deer. Before we get to those conversations, though, we got to get to our weekly segment. It's In Case You Missed It. This past week at rdnewsnow.com was a busy one, and it's only going to get busier. In case you missed it, a federal election was called on Sunday, and voters will go to the polls on April 28th to vote in MPs and ultimately a new government. Over the coming days and weeks, watch rdnewsnow.com for our dedicated election page and candidate profiles. And of course, April 28th will be your go-to source for everything on election night. Meantime, I had the chance this week to sit down in person with three young girls at Don Campbell Elementary. Their names are Kaysen, Sophia, and Charlie. And they told me all about their science project called Blaze Block. And for their work on Blaze Block, they have been chosen as regional winners, one of 6 regional winners, for the prestigious 33rd Annual Exploravision competition presented by Toshiba. Congratulations to them, and if they advance to the next stage, and that would be being named a national winner, they would get to go on a trip this summer to Washington, D.C. Out in Blackfalds, parents are raising the alarm due to alleged chronic speeding through a local school zone. RD News Now reporter Ian Gustafson spoke with a concerned parent as well as the town about that issue. Elsewhere, a 75-year-old man from Sundre was sentenced this week to 6.5 years in jail in relation to a 48-year-old cold case. This was all connected to the tragic death of 16-year-old Pauline Brazeau in 1976. Ronald Edwards' conviction was on one count of manslaughter. And Red Deer will get a $12 million grant through the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation's Housing Accelerator Fund. That money is intended to support a range of housing initiatives to increase supply and improve affordability. As well, we learned this week that the lawyer fighting for an injunction against the closure of Red Deer's overdose prevention site lost that case, and the OPS will close as scheduled after March 31st. We have more on that story at rdnewsnow.com. In sports, big news in the Western Hockey League. It didn't have anything to do directly with the Red Deer Rebels, but the WHL announced this week it is expanding to Penticton and Chilliwack. I used to live in Chilliwack, and so I'm on a bit of a crusade to hashtag bring back the Bruins. I lived there when the Bruins were in town between 2006 and 2011. So more on that big WHL story, including the league's press conference video that it held in the Okanagan a few days ago, is at our website. Finally, congrats to 16-year-old Easton Deneau of the AJHL's Drumheller Dragons. Easton is from Red Deer, and this week he was named AJHL Rookie of the Year. With the Dragons, Deneau put up 56 points, including 21 goals, and that gave him 1.04 points per game in his first year. Very nice. This has been In Case You Missed It. All right, so we're back to the topic at hand for this week's show. As noted earlier, you're going to hear shortly from Corporal Mohammed Khalid with Alberta RCMP, and then two amazing community builders who put on the recent Community Power of One event that I was very privileged to have on the podcast this week. I hope you enjoy those conversations. I'm chatting now with Corporal Mohammed Khalid, who is the hate crime coordinator for the Alberta RCMP, and he's also the co-chair of the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, Gender, and Harassment Action Committee. Thanks for taking some time to chat with me today, Corporal.
Good morning, Josh. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So we're talking today in the aftermath, if you will, of an incident which happened 4 weeks ago here in Red Deer with a number of concerning signs and symbols that were displayed that had anti-immigrant sentiments. Deport them all, White Lives Matter. And RCMP have confirmed no charges are coming. For our listeners, before we get into the meat of the questioning today, and for the sake of transparency, would you mind sharing what your role was in that investigation?
Sure thing. So my role with that investigation was more so of a support role, so investigational guidance, as well as some of the community engagement follow-up, and then providing some resources for the detachment members and investigators.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that. Perhaps we could start by getting into the sections of the Criminal Code of Canada which discuss hate crimes.
Sure thing. So within the Criminal Code of Canada, there's actually no standalone section for a hate crime. In fact, the Criminal Code doesn't define a hate crime. Each agency has its own definition. But the general definition is a criminal offense committed against a person or property which is motivated in whole or in part by the suspect's hate, bias, or prejudice towards an identifiable group. So what the Criminal Code does define is what an identifiable group is, which is any section of the public distinguished by race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression, or any other similar factor. So how it works is when we have a crime that's committed, let's say there's an assault that's committed for, the victim was targeted because of their religious dress. So how it works currently, because there's no standalone section for a hate crime, the person or the suspect is charged with an assault. Then through the court process, the motivation of hatred is highlighted, and essentially what happens is upon sentencing, we request an increased sentence due to that aggravating factor of hatred. So this is a key point we like to clarify when it comes to hate crimes, is within the court process, that, again, that example of the assault goes through as an assault investigation, any other investigation would, of course, being unique in the sense with the motivation, but that hate component comes into play upon sentencing. So it's a key point to clarify. So that's how it works within for hate motivated crimes. So it's those two components is the crime itself, again, that example of the assault, and then the motivation behind the crime, the hatred. So those two components make a hate motivated crime. So with that said, the criminal code does kind of break down there's a couple other areas that do deal with hatred, and they're broken down into the main one is the hate propaganda offenses, or commonly known as hate speech. So there's 4 sections within the criminal code under the hate propaganda sections. So these are the sections that law enforcement and police are going to look at when dealing with hateful speech and maybe content online. Maybe a demonstration that's hateful with hateful messaging and so on. So these are the sections we're going to consider that are called the hate propaganda offenses. So those 4 are Section 318 is advocating genocide. Section 319.1 is public incitement of hatred. Section 319.2 is willful promotion of hatred. And then the most recent one, 319.2.1, is willful promotion of anti-Semitism. So those are the hate propaganda offenses. And then the final one, there's a specific mischief charge for property that's primarily used by an identifiable group, like we defined earlier. So let's say it's a place of worship, maybe a community center that's primarily used by a specific group. So that's it. So we have that property offense, the hate propaganda offenses, along with the hate motivated crimes. And again, those are not specific hate crime sections. They're the crime plus the motivation of hatred to make it defined as a hate motivated crime. So that's what it comes down to when we're talking about hate crime sections or related sections within the criminal code.
Okay, thanks for going through that. I definitely have a follow-up here. Mm-hmm. So despite there being just that handful of sections, there's still clearly a lot of different factors around whether something can be deemed a crime per se. And even with the incident here in Red Deer, where the messaging and the symbols are clearly being used to be discriminatory, charges are still not being laid. So when RCMP get into investigating these things and they have to find a certain threshold to lay charges potentially, and of course it's all on a case-by-case basis, some people point to that freedom of speech factor as to what protects them in doing it. So my question is, where is that threshold? How do you come to it? And how do RCMP and their investigations navigate that fine line between sending the message that these incidents are not acceptable, that they are harmful in ways, yet not laying charges because they don't meet that criminal threshold?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. And one of the, I'll just backtrack on the hate propaganda offenses. One of the reasons why there's much discussion around them, and anything hate speech related, there's always going to be that conversation around freedom of speech. And that's one of the reasons why the 3 of them, aside from the public incitement of hatred offense, the remainder actually require Attorney General consent to proceed. One of the reasons is, for what you just mentioned, is our rights under the Canadian Charter grants the freedom of conscience and religion, and freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, and that includes peaceful assembly, the freedom to protest and have rallies and so on. It's not the role of the police to to police people's thoughts and opinions and beliefs and so on, right? It's within our rights as Canadians to to express our opinions and so on. With that said, Section 1 of the Charter says it's okay to have those beliefs as long as you're not causing harm or bringing harm to others. But once you start doing that, you're promoting hatred, inciting hatred, riling up others, arousing others to call on them to harm others, against an identifiable group. Once we start moving towards those actions, then we're looking at potentially a criminal act. In other words, we have these fundamental freedoms that are guaranteed to us, but under the Charter, they're not limitless, right? So they don't protect us, protect any conduct considered unlawful under the law. So to go back to your question about the threshold for these offenses, it is quite high for those reasons, right? And it does go beyond statements that ridicule or belittle or insult someone or a group of people. It has to go beyond expressive freedom. And case law tells us it's dehumanizing and demonizing behaviors, demonizing the identifiable group. When we say dehumanizing, we mean no longer seeing them as human beings, portraying them as animals, vermin, insects, disease carriers. This dehumanizes them and makes them appropriate recipients of hate. So when we say demonizing, we mean not only is the identifiable group portrayed as unclean, but they're also the sources of evil and all evil, right? So they're made to seem worthy of blame or contempt. So hate is an extreme emotion that portrays identifiable groups in a certain light. It goes above and beyond an insulting comment that might offend someone or a group of people. So that's the reason why the threshold is quite high, and these are some of the limitations that we have with respect to enforcing some of these laws. And but at the same time, we do investigate everything. So one of the messages that we continue to stress, and we always will, is to report anything that you feel needs to be reported. One of the things that commonly comes up is assumptions as to what is legal and what is illegal, and people hesitate to report sometimes due to those assumptions, and we try to stress to avoid doing that. So we ask everyone to report whatever they feel needs to be reported. Go ahead and report. That's our role, is to investigate and determine if there's a criminal act that's happened. We'll investigate. We'll follow up with victims, provide support, and so on. So I think that answered your question, Josh.
Yeah, it does. And so people familiar with what happened in Red Deer will hear your answer about thresholds, and they might ask, well, what about the fact that these folks were on the doorsteps of settlement agencies when they were using their freedom of expression? How does that not meet that higher threshold?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So when within our, I won't get into specific details of that particular investigation, but what I can say is anytime we're looking at, any investigation really, we are considering whether or not other offenses have taken place. So, for example, if one of those hate propaganda offenses, it has not, we haven't met the threshold to proceed with one of those charges, there could be a potential for other offenses, right? So, it could be, are we looking at a causing a disturbance? Are we looking at a trespassing? Are we looking at um, any other offenses that could be there? So that's part of our investigation, right? So we wouldn't approach an investigation strictly, with that narrow focus. We are going to look broadly and identify what we have, when it comes to the broad picture and the broad occurrence, right? And so, again, I won't speak specifically about that investigation, but I will say if there are other offenses that have taken place, we'll proceed with investigating those as well.
Okay. Thanks for addressing that. Are standards and the laws around hate crimes evolving at all? Are they clear enough that the job of law enforcement is not more complicated than it needs to be with these sections of the criminal code?
So with the current laws, certainly there are areas, that are important to be clarified when it comes to what exactly, again, like some of the things that we talked about, what those thresholds are, and but that comes with training and raising awareness, whether it's internal or to our officers or externally to the public, and for them also to know their rights and just be aware of hate crimes and different trends and so on. But it is evolving. There are conversations happening, surrounding what hate crime laws look like in Canada, and there are discussions being had with respect to potentially creating a standalone section within the criminal code, and other items. There's different bylaws that are looked at, so sort of closely related to those street harassment type occurrences where we may not be reaching that criminal threshold, but there's potential for there's a non-criminal hate motivated incident that has occurred. Someone said a racial slur, for example, and so on. So these kind of different avenues are being considered when it comes to best practices to address hate motivated occurrences in general. So don't say it necessarily up to say crimes, but occurrences in general. So yeah, I would say it is certainly evolving. Again, the key is going to be that education piece for the community as well as our officers.
In your position as hate crimes coordinator for Alberta RCMP and as co-chair of the aforementioned committee, when we see these incidents like the one that happened in Red Deer, and can't forget the one that was very similar that happened in St. Albert in January, what would your message be to folks, not necessarily the ones who were in Red Deer or St. Albert, but just in general? What would your message be to those people who may consider in the future going out in public and displaying hateful or clearly discriminatory materials?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And we do have to always include that piece about our charter rights, right? It's very important, right? It's a constitutional right of ours to share our opinions. One of the things that we encourage is people to get out and be active within their community. This is a part of community practice, if you will, is to get out and voice your opinions about various topics. But we have to be aware of that line that we can't cross, right? And so again, back to that education piece, is to be aware of what the law says with respect to voicing your opinion and crossing that threshold to become hate speech, right? What I will say is hate crimes are unique in a sense where they're commonly referred to as message crimes, where the suspect, if you will, is trying to send a message to a particular group or to anyone else. So it's commonly called message crimes. We also have to send a message back saying that criminal acts will not be tolerated, right? So anything that comes to us as a report will be investigated. And tying into that piece about stressing the importance of reporting, we encourage the public to report whatever they feel needs to be reported. Please report. Do not hesitate. Report. We're going to investigate these, any occurrences. We're going to determine whether or not a criminal act has taken place. We're going to respond as seriously as we do to other reports. We're going to identify who's involved. We're going to determine if crime has been committed. So it's fairly straightforward. And of course, we're going to follow up with our community, ensure our victims are looked after with support and resources. We're going to engage our community and raise awareness about what hate-motivated crimes are and those laws and limitations and so on, and continue to encourage reporting and try to address those barriers to reporting that may be there.
Does that support for, as you say, victims still occur when charges aren't laid?
Absolutely. So we have within almost all detachments, our victim support units are available to assist in many areas, from mental health to court proceedings and so on. But outside of the court process, they can provide many different services to members of the public, and that's one of the services within the detachment. So our victim services units are volunteers, and they have access to a variety of different resources when it comes to any report outside of hate crime. But I will say those opportunities to provide those services come with the reporting, of course, right? And so again, we do encourage members of the public to come forward if there's an issue or concern that they have. Please report that. At the end of the day, we're holding people accountable. If there's supports that we can offer, we'll offer those. And you're potentially assisting other victims in other investigations potentially. So it's a message that we ensure to stress.
I'm chatting with Corporal Mohammed Khalid, Hate Crimes Coordinator with Alberta RCMP. Mohammed, are there any other initiatives that your department is working on right now that you'd want to share with the public?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I'd like to mention is our online crime reporting portal. So we've had the online crime reporting up for quite some time, but we most recently added hate-motivated incidents into it, so people can report hate-motivated incidents. It's non-criminal occurrences to the in that portal online, and it's just to address those barriers to reporting that we talked about. The hesitation to report. So it's an opportunity to report comfort of your own home, maybe with someone assisting with a language barrier, for example. That may get to a point where you have to attend a detachment, of course, but that initial step is an opportunity to address that barrier that we talk about, the hesitation to report. So the online crime reporting. And then we're creating a number of different resources for our frontline officers and community, different hate crime awareness information pamphlets, for example, specific to for our frontline process and demonstrations. We have best practices that talk about exactly what we just discussed, as the hate speech laws and best practices in approaching different occurrences. And then continuing to raise awareness internally with our law enforcement, with our detachments.
And where can people go to keep up to speed with all of those things that you mentioned?
Keep an eye on our social media, our X accounts, our Facebook account, our Instagram. We put out social media initiatives once in a while, raising awareness about hate crime, how to report, the benefits of reporting, resources available to the community. So keep an eye out for those.
And that's on the Alberta RCMP social media, I presume.
Yes, it is. Alberta RCMP and the online crime reporting, you can do, of course, on your desktop, but we also do have an app, the Alberta RCMP app. If you do type Alberta RCMP online crime reporting, it'll take you right to it.
This has been our chat with Alberta RCMP Hate Crimes Coordinator Corporal Mohammed Khalid. Mohammed, thanks a lot for doing this.
Thanks, Josh. It was a pleasure. Take care.
We welcome to the Everything Red Deer podcast now two people who care a hell of a darn lot about this city. One is the program manager at Red Deer Local Immigration Partnership and also the executive director at Ubuntu Mobilizing Central Alberta. She also sits on the board for the local branch of the Canadian Mental Health Association, Jilta Datus Hall. And we also have the Nanatoweoan Two-Spirit Program Keeper at the Red Deer Native Friendship Society, Shannon Humphrey. Thank you to the both of you for being here and contributing to the Everything Red Deer podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So, the both of you were recently involved in putting on the 10th annual Community Power of One, that's community with a capital U, event. The event was held last Friday on the UN International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. You had some great keynote speakers. Lots of people showed up. My first question for the both of you, from your perspectives, what is the overarching goal of that event each year? And are you finding success with that objective?
Thanks for that question. I think the overarching goal every year is to bring community together. And if you notice, there's a capital U within community because we really want to focus on the person, on individuals, ensuring that they see themselves as being a part of this community and having a role specifically to dismantling and combating racism in Red Deer.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that importance of unity is really the overarching message year to year, but also just within our community, because we see a lot of division coming from within. And for communities that face oppression, we often have to fight for space. So it's that unity of all of the organizations, all of our community to really kind of come together to do something that makes a lasting change and lasting impact.
Did Community Power of One have a theme this year?
Yes. So for the past few years, what we've done is we've kept the reoccurring theme of rebuild, reconnect, and remember. Because with those three items, it forces us to remember the reason why we celebrate the day or we honor the day. It allows us to reconnect as a community, and it also allows for us to rebuild or to build something new so that we can continue moving forward.
So as I mentioned, this event happened last Friday. And the reason we're having you on now, a week later, is because it's important, like with many things that happen throughout the year, many observances, it's important to keep the conversation going throughout the year. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And one of the changes that we've made this year is that we will continue to have post events leading up to next year's events as well. So we're in talks with various communities as well as various other organizations to see what would be some of the best events that we can host as we lead up to 2026 Community Power of One. So for the this is the 10th anniversary this year. And prior to that, we would just host an event during the year on the day of observance. But this year, we're doing something different. We're changing it a bit. So we'll be hosting post events as well.
Yeah, and I think just going with our theme of that reconnect is reconnecting to culture. I think everyone is Indigenous to somewhere, and a lot of the times we grow up outside of that culture and we don't have the access or the opportunity to be a part of it. So this is really about bringing all of those communities together to celebrate each other's cultures together and really just kind of look at that truth piece that goes into reconciliation. So we remember the truth, we start with the truth, and these are the actions that go into that reconciliation. So what we do going forward, we really want to look at empowering those community voices, empowering the voices who maybe otherwise wouldn't have a platform or wouldn't get to share those stories that are so important for our community to hear.
So you're both very well versed in what it means to foster a community that is acting united and as one. But I imagine even you learn something new when you attend Community Power of One each year, even as organizers?
Absolutely. Every single time. We really make a point of bringing in speakers that have resonated with us in the past or that we remember from other events. And I think a lot of empowering those voices and making sure our stories are heard comes back to that we all have something to give. We are the stories we carry. And so if we have the platform to share them, then we can learn something from each other. And I think there's a lot to be learned about unity from each of the individual cultures that are represented and as a city as a whole.
Yep. And when you look at the list of the speakers or the folks who presented at the workshops, it was so diverse. It actually represented Red Deer. So we had people who shared stories regarding their time as being a child soldier. We had presenters talk about immigration and the intersectionality with that around racism. But our keynote speakers, Tite Lope from Edmonton, who's a former poet laureate, as well as Lawrence Amo, who's a former Indigenous RCMP officer. It just shows the diversity of the event as well as how we want to work together to work together to combat racism, because it depends on all of us.
Again, you've both been around Central Alberta a long time. You've seen Community Power of One grow, though you haven't always been involved in organizing it, perhaps. How does Community Power of One and the spirit of it need to evolve to reach more people?
It's interesting that the first Community Power of One, I worked on that committee in a different capacity. So I was not in the role that I was in currently, that I find myself currently. And I think it's interesting that 10 years later, now I'm part of the organizing committee. I think it has evolved in that we are beginning to see how individuals have a contributing story, the way that they have different stories to tell, like Shannon alluded to earlier, and that we're just not focusing on race because we understand the intersectionality and we see what happens between the intersections of race and other identities. And so we've seen a shift in recent years of making sure that the event is very inclusive and that people are able to share within their own right, that they're able to share how they're most comfortable. Last year, we had presenters who were performers and artists, and we were able to talk about how folks can use art to combat racism as well. So I think that's one of the better evolution that the event has seen.
Absolutely. And I think what speaks to that is the diversity that we're seeing on the planning committee even. Like, we've got a lot more organizations involved than previous years, and every year we get a few more. And I think that really takes a strengths-based approach to kind of empower those people who are passionate about creating those voices and making those changes and really just being there for their community. And it's nice to see that much diversity and so many people who are really, really passionate about bringing the community together and building that unity at such a fundamental level, because without those people, these events wouldn't exist.
Yeah. And even as planning committee members, we've gotten to know so much about each other and to become closer, not just as colleagues and work, but as friends and learning more about people's stories and histories and sharing at the circle too. At the committee meetings is where we're learning from each other and how to say things properly and what not to say and why not to say those things. And so I think being a committee member and having that opportunity to plan this event has given us a chance as well to grow and to develop friendships outside of work.
When we come back, we're going to talk about an incident that happened here in Red Deer a few weeks ago. We're back on the Everything Red Deer podcast, speaking with Shannon Humphrey from the Red Deer Native Friendship Center and Jilta Datus Hall of Red Deer Local Immigration Partnership, and they're both heavily involved in putting on this year's 10th annual Community Power of One conference. So, a few weeks ago now, there was an incident in Red Deer wherein a number of people displayed some signs and symbols that were not very inclusive, not promoting unity. They were frankly racist and xenophobic. And RCMP have investigated this. It looks like they're not going to be laying any charges. With that knowledge, what would be your message as we move further away from that incident and inevitably closer to the next one? Hopefully, Shannon could take this one first.
Yeah, definitely. I think with that incident happening, it really just reinforces the importance of events like Community Power of One, where it is safe for us to gather in community. There is a lot of cultures and different types of people who have had to take their practices underground or have to hide for their own personal safety. So I think that events like this really just bring that safety back to community and really reinforce the importance that collective action is up to us all. It belongs to us all. And it's a product of everyone who cares. And the more that we can show that support within our community and provide those resources and supports and kind of keep that hope alive in the community that there is someone who cares and there are organizations who are doing the good work and, trying to walk in a good way, that the more visible we are and kind of the louder we are together.
I just wanted to add that these incidences help to remind community that the work is ongoing, that there isn't a start and stop for this type of work, because behaviors will change over the years. And as young people grow up and as older people continue to be in community, we'll continue to have these interactions. And so it's up to us, the organizations, as well as individuals in the community, to ensure that we're continuing to have the conversations, that it's not enough to simply say, well, we haven't had any issues within the past year or two, and so our work is done, but to see the importance and to continue attending events such as Community Power of One, continue to learn how we can combat hate and racism in any and every which way that we can. And so this just serves as a reminder that the work is not completed and that there isn't a finish line.
Whether it's this incident where there's a group of people outside with signs and flags, or maybe it's one person saying something to somebody on the bus or driving past somebody, which we know has happened many a time, and saying something nasty to them. Do you have any advice on how somebody can best be a bystander without doing nothing?
Sure. That's a great question. And it's one of the things that the Community Power of One is currently organizing, a bystander training that will be coming up shortly. We're hoping to release all of the information because as people change, they need to have the tools and the resources to continue to be upstanding citizens. And not everyone knows what to do in situations such as that, right? It's shocking for a lot of people. It's traumatizing for others. And so we believe in giving community the tools that they need for them to be able to be empowered to stand up when they see something. At times, it may look like phoning or sending an email to their representatives, but other times it may be that they may need to step in to protect the victim and to allow them and to remind them that they too belong in Red Deer. So we're hoping very, very shortly to release information on when the training will be taking place so that folks can equip themselves on how to combat racism and hate and bigotry as well.
Yeah, I think you speak to that so well. And I think the other piece of that is the community education that goes along with it, is a lot of those viewpoints, a lot of the protests that we see happen are based in misinformation or based in an idea that just isn't fully developed. We don't always have all the facts. We don't always know what's behind that. And so I think it's such an important message that, yes, everyone does belong in Red Deer. And while there's probably always going to be that narrative and there's always going to be the opposition to identities that we don't understand or experiences that we don't understand, it's the importance of being able to be visible and educate people on what the actual facts are, especially when it comes to marginalized, oppressed communities, especially when it comes to what it means to be a person of color or what it means to be Indigenous or what it means to be queer. Because there's so many stereotypes and so many things that are just factually inaccurate. And the more we can kind of provide that context and that information within education, whether that's educating the educators or going into schools and sharing stories and experiences, or building public awareness through visibility like public art or podcasts like this, or there's lots of different platforms we can use, and it comes down to how are we empowering those voices that represent those specific groups and that information and, speaking to how it impacts us in our day-to-day. I think we're very, very good at seeing how things like generational trauma really impact us in a macro environment and looking at the systemic isms and obias, but we're not necessarily so good at looking at how they're playing out in our own lives in real time. And it can be scary to step into those situations. And I saw a video this weekend of an incident that happened in Calgary. And one of the things my wife said to me is, holy bystander effect. Like, all of these people just stood there and watched it happen. But then I kind of watched the video back and I was like, well, that's a really big guy. And, it's going to trigger that fight, flight, or freeze response. And so a lot of the times that bystander effect is also fear-based and is based in that personal safety. And so it comes down to that training and that education. Yeah, how do we step in when we don't feel safe, or how can we create safety in numbers when we're out in public?
Would either of you have a message to those folks who were standing out there with those signs and flags?
Absolutely. I think it's always worth a conversation. And I think the best conversations have been the hardest conversations for folks to have, that they can use this as an opportunity to learn what is it that they're reflecting, what is it that they're saying to community, what is it that they're representing. Some of the symbols are symbols that we will classify as hate-based, fear-based as well. They're essentially trying to send a message to certain people that they don't belong here, that Red Deer is not their home. And we know that many, many, many communities have built Red Deer, and individuals have lived here for long periods of time and are contributing in various ways. And so I always invite folks like that to have a good, hearty conversation. And if for some reason they may be afraid of the shame and the guilt that comes with that, the library is a perfect place to start. The libraries have books, they have access to podcasts, they have access to other resources where the individual can start with self and learning about that, and then they can proceed to having a conversation with another person as well. There are also a lot of organizations that are doing great work regarding racism, but also regarding identity and national identity and patriotism, right? And so I would really encourage them to reach out to some of the groups in their community to see what they can learn and share. And they can also share what is their fear of the other.
I would like to invite you both to share with the listeners a little bit about the organizations that you're with. What does RD Lip do, and what is the Nanatawewin program all about?
Yeah. So the Nanatawewin Two-Spirit program is all about empowering voices and really building the next generation of knowledge keepers and recognizing that the youth are the elders of tomorrow. We're the ancestors of tomorrow, so we must act accordingly. And I think even coming back to that last question of what's the message is that everyone is Indigenous to somewhere. Everyone carries stories, and those stories matter. And so there's got to be a place in community for those stories. There's got to be a place where everyone can feel like they belong. And I think that one of the things that we see with a lot of those outwards displays is just the overarching message of go back to where you came from. And I think the reminder there is we're all immigrants. We all came from somewhere. If you look back through history, like at one time this was a land that didn't have anyone here, including the Indigenous people who may have came over during the time of the land bridge or may have, not necessarily originated from here. So when we're making overarching things like go back to where you came from, what does it actually mean? And so within the Two-Spirit program, we talk a lot about language and symbolism and intersectional identities. So we're using words like Indigenous or people of color or BIPOC, but what do those terms actually mean in and of themselves? And they may mean something different to every single person in the room. And it's creating the space to have those conversations, but also creating the access to culture that we may not have grown up with. Like, I was adopted at birth, and I've never been so connected to my Indigenous culture as I am right now. And I think a lot of it is just proximity of running those programs and, being in spaces with the youth or in the schools or at events like Community Power of One, and really sharing those stories, really creating that space where people can ask questions and have that access to their culture that they otherwise wouldn't have. And so going forward, it's looking at what is the legacy that we're leaving and how do we really record that in real time. So looking at things like videography, how do we really capture the impact of these events? How do we really capture the voices of the youth and represent them in a way that they're not only comfortable with, but proud of. And really empowering them to own their space and be comfortable owning that space and not sort of shying away from it in a way that's like, well, I don't know if I have permission to own this space, or I don't know that it's my place to speak up. And really kind of recognizing the importance of empowering voices, when to empower them, and when to speak up yourself, because it is your story and it does matter. And so with the Two Spirit program, a lot of it is cultural programming. Right now we're working on book club, videography stuff. We've got a public art project coming up that's very tied to community power of one and asks the question, how do you want to be represented within our community? What makes you feel safe? And if, our stories and our work are never finished, then the mosaic that is our community is never finished. So how can we represent that very visually through public art or through podcasting or through videography or different mediums like that really captures those empowered voices?
So the Red Deer Local Immigration Partnership is funded by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, and the goal is to ensure that community connection is there, so that the host community is adequately accessible and is adequately prepared to receive newcomers as they're coming into our communities, but also that we work with the newcomers to ensure that their needs are being met. So we are, in essence, a collective impact organization. There are many stakeholders and partners that sit around the table, both virtual and literal table. And we work together to ensure that the community has what it needs to be the city of choice. Canada is an aging country, and we need people to come in and work. And with that, they're bringing in their families and friends to visit. And so we want to ensure that Red Deer is a city of choice. And I think it's also something that the mayor has echoed as well, so that people can see Red Deer as the place that they want to be. And so we do that work through research. We do that work through working groups, but the most important way that we do that is by building the community connections, by ensuring that Indigenous perspective is always at the table, by ensuring that we are community focused, and so that we're not creating a community that no one wants, but we're creating a community for the people, and it's by the people as well.
Cool. And I think I mentioned off the top, you also lead Ubuntu Mobilizing Central Alberta, and there's a really cool new cultural center downtown?
Yes.
Can people come
so
visit that?
The Roots Cultural and Event Center is a dream that the organization has had for a while, and it's essentially a gathering place where people can come. We have books that's on display that people can borrow books, and to have community conversations, and to have some of the smaller ethno-cultural gatherings and events and hosting certain programs. It's right downtown, so folks can always stop by, even on their lunch hour, to meet other people and to be able to connect. And Ubuntu is also a part of the Red Deer Local Immigration Partnership through the Immigrant Advisory Council, and we have a really great working relationship with the Red Deer Native Friendship Center as well. And so it's this event, the Community Power of One, just encompasses every fiber of what it means to be from Red Deer.
And Shannon, I almost forgot, your program has an online shop of sorts?
Yeah, you bet. We have what's called the Friendship Shop. So all of the proceeds from Friendship Shop go back into supporting programming, specifically youth programming, and supporting our Legacy Link, which is connecting youth with the elders in the community. And I think with Friendship Shop, a large priority of mine within our Two-Spirit program is building that visibility. So making sure we have pronoun pins available, making sure that those pins are in different languages that really represent and embody who people are, so that they're not defined by labels, but they're using labels to define themselves. And I think a large part of that is claiming those spaces and having local artisans contribute. And so we've got lots of local people who contribute to Friendship Shop, and they see those proceeds from that. They also support our programs going back into things like the youth camp out that we just went on this weekend. We went to the Painted Warriors camp, and it was a really, really cool group. 18 of us went out, and we wouldn't get to do that stuff otherwise. So it's a means of kind of us giving back to our own community, but also ensuring that those programs are sustainable and that we can continue doing the good work in community.
And most of the speaker gifts and items from this year came from the Friendship Store. And so it's community helping community and just ensuring that we keep as much things local as possible and helping each other's organizations to succeed.
Okay, I have one final question for Shannon. It wasn't a question I came in here with, but I noticed your pin.
Yes.
It says, respect my existence or expect my resistance, right?
Absolutely.
So what does that mean to you?
To me, that really means that if you have a problem with me, see you later. No, respect my existence or expect my resistance is just kind of speaking to the fact that I'm done being quiet. I'm done fighting for space. And if I have to fight for that space to prove that I belong there, I will. And I'll tell you exactly why I belong there and what I bring to the table, because I think in a circle, especially in Indigenous culture, everyone's equal in a circle and everyone has something to contribute, and the value that it brings is of equal value. It's of equal contribution. And so when I'm talking about respect my existence or expect resistance, it's reducing that bystander effect, being the voice in the community, being the visibility that I didn't have growing up, because I know what it means to me going into spaces and seeing other people being very visible and standing up for what they believe in, or displaying their identities on their pins or shirts, or like literally wearing their hearts on their sleeve, because I just think that visibility is so important. And it's also very validating for someone who didn't necessarily have that representation in community.
Thanks for sharing that. It goes really well with the overall conversation about community power of one, I think. So one last question for Jilta as well. How can people get involved with next year's Community Power of One? Absolutely.
So I think it's a great opportunity for businesses and organizations to participate. Their employees can attend the event. We've seen more and more organizations choose to have it as a professional development day where they can participate. But we're also looking for sponsorship to ensure that the event continues. We do have grants. But those are not sustainable, right? And so we're looking for other sources. So if any organizations or businesses would like to be involved in one way or another, we would be more than happy for them to connect with us. Again, our social media and Facebook page especially is the best way to connect with us. We're looking for sponsors, we're looking for partners, but most of all, we're looking for folks to actually show up and attend the event.
All right. Well, that was Jilta Datus with Red Deer, Jilta Datus Hall with Red Deer Local Immigration Partnership, and Shannon Humphrey with the Red Deer Native Friendship Center, both with Community Power of One. If you missed Community Power of One last Friday, you can still, as a piece comes off of my pen, you can still go to the Community Power of One Facebook page right now, and there's stuff posted throughout the year, I'm told. There will be videos, pictures from this year's event, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we're also doing a legacy project. So within my work in the Two Spirit program, again, empowering those voices, we'll be doing interviews throughout the year. So if you want to be part of those interviews and have your voice heard, definitely reach out to us and get involved, be part of the committee, be a part of the event. And like Jilta said, we need those voices and those community sponsors to ensure that this particular event remains free for our community to attend.
Sweet. And you can also learn more at rdlip.ca and rdnfs.net. Thanks so much to Shannon and to Jilta for joining me on the Everything Red Deer podcast. I've been Josh Hall. Thanks for listening.
This has been the Everything Red Deer podcast, powered by RD News Now. This podcast is produced and edited by the team at RD News Now and Pattison Media Red Deer. Make sure to download our mobile app and subscribe to our free daily newsletter by visiting rdnewsnow.com. Thanks for listening.